So let's now continue with our discussion on negotiation. We're now in section 36, or what we call now as restrictive endorsement. So when is there a restrictive endorsement? There is restrictive endorsement when, first, it prohibits the further negotiation of the instrument. Next, constitutes the endorsee the agent of the endorser. And then the third one would be vests title in the endorsee in trust for or for the use of some other person. But I want you to take note also what is provided for in the last paragraph of section 36. That mere absence of the word implying the power to negotiate does not mean that the instrument has been restrictively endorsed. So take for example, so the first one, prohibiting the further negotiation. You are making the endorsee the agent of the endorser. And then the third one would be vesting title or conferring title to an endorsee as a trustee or for the use of some other person. So let's take a look at these illustrations. Insofar as the first one, prohibiting the further negotiation of the instrument. So I promise to pay Sanon or order 1 million pesos, signed Mike. That's what is appearing on the face of the instrument. Now, if what will appear at the back of the instrument is as follows, pay to Yang only, signed Sanon, then with the inclusion of the word only, there is what we call now as restrictive endorsement. Because with the presence of the word only, Yang can no longer further negotiate the instrument to a third person. Okay? So, or words of similar meaning may also be used. Instead of using the word only, pwede mong sabihin na pay to Yang and no one else. So with the inclusion of the word only, with the inclusion of that phrase and no one else, the negotiable character of that instrument has been destroyed. So if the negotiable character of that instrument has been destroyed, then further negotiation of the same shall no longer be allowed. So that's the first kind of restrictive endorsement. Second classification, constituting the endorsee the agent of the endorser. Well, that's easy. On the face of the instrument, again, I promise to pay Sanon or order 1 million, signed Mike. Now, at the back of the instrument, sabihin mo ngayon, pay to Yang, my agent, signed Sanon. Okay? Pay to Yang, my agent, signed Sanon. In this situation, Sanon is making Yang as his own agent. Okay? So if that will be the case, if that will be the case, is it still possible for Yang to further negotiate the instrument to another? The answer would be yes. It is still possible for Yang to further negotiate the instrument. And halimbawa, Yang negotiated that to Zenny. Can Zenny later on still negotiate that to Alpha? The answer would be yes. Because the negotiable character of this instrument has not been destroyed. But I want you to remember that although in this kind of restrictive endorsement, Yang here, the restrictive endorsee, can further negotiate the instrument. However, parties after Yang will only have similar right as that of Yang. So, what's the meaning of that? So, it means that if Yang is the agent of Xenon, and Yang later on negotiated that to Zenny, Zenny to Alpha, then it follows that Zenny and Alpha are still agents of Xenon. Why? Because Yang's title will be the one which will be transferred to Zenny and Alpha. Okay, so under Article 37, tingnan natin. Under Article 37, sabi niya doon, all subsequent endorsees acquire only the title of the first endorsee under the restrictive endorsement. So, if Yang here is the agent of Xenon, and Yang later on negotiated that to Zenny, Zenny to Alpha, then it follows that Zenny and Alpha are still agents of Xenon. That rights of Zenny and Alpha will be similar to the right of Yang. And what's the right of Yang? She is acting as the agent of Xenon. So pare-pareho na silang tatlo. But take note, in this kind of restrictive endorsement, this instrument can still be negotiated. Doon lang sa first kind of restrictive endorsement, prohibiting the further negotiation of the instrument, that further negotiation of that restrictively endorsed instrument is now prohibited. So the third kind of restrictive endorsement is that vests title in the endorsee in trust for or for the use of some other person. So in this particular case, you are actually making the endorsee as a trustee of that instrument or as a trustee of some other person. So kagaya dito, on the face of the instrument, it reads as follows. Again, I promise to pay Shannon or order 1 million pesos, signed Mike. However, at the back of the instrument, it now reads as follows. Pay to Yang as trustee of Zenny. So ano ang ngayon, sino si Yang ngayon? Yang is a trustee of Zenny. So tanong, can Yang later on negotiate this instrument, for example, to Alpha? And then Alpha to Bert? Is that possible? The answer is yes, because in this situation, although restrictively endorsed, this further negotiation of this instrument is not prohibited. It is not prohibited. So if Yang will negotiate that to Alpha, and then Alpha will negotiate that to Bert, what will be the effect of that negotiation, of this restrictively endorsed instrument? Well, the rights of Alpha and Bert, the rights of these endorsees after Yang, the restrictive endorsee, will only be similar to the right of Yang. So if Yang is a trustee of Zenny, it follows that Alpha will also be constituted as the trustee of Zenny. Or if Alpha will negotiate that to Bert, then Bert will also be considered as a trustee of Zenny because the rights of A and B, Alpha and Bert, will only be similar to the rights of Yang in the instrument. Okay? And before we'll proceed with the rights under Section 37, I want to reiterate on you that mere absence of the words implying the power to negotiate, mere absence of the word of negotiability, mere absence of the word order, or the word bearer, or words of similar meaning in your endorsement does not mean that it was already restrictively endorsed. So, pay to Yang, period, signed Xenon. Kapag ganun ang nangyari, hindi ibig sabihin restrictively endorsed na yan. No. Because absence of the words implying the power to negotiate does not mean that your instrument has been restrictively endorsed. So, if an instrument has been restrictively endorsed, what will be the rights of this restrictive endorsee? Halimbawa dito, Yang is the restrictive endorsee and she's asking as trustee of Zenny. Question, is it possible for Yang to enforce payment from Zenon? Or is it possible for Yang to enforce payment from that maker, from that person primarily liable in this promissory note? The answer would be yes. Bakit? Because under Section 37, the first right of a person who received that restrictive endorsement is to receive payment of the instrument. Okay, to receive payment. So even if the instrument has been restrictively endorsed, you still have the right to receive payment. What else? That if you will not be paid, then you can also bring an action in order to enforce your right from that instrument. So you could actually institute also a case of collection in order to collect what is that amount that is appearing on the face of your instrument. Ano pa? You have also the right to negotiate it. Except, obviously, insofar as Section 36, Paragraph A. Okay? To transfer his rights as endorsee where the form of the endorsement authorizes him to do so. So, kailan lang pwede mag-endorse sa restrictive, mag-endorse yung endorsee sa restrictive endorsement? Only in paragraphs B and C of Section 36. Because in Section 36A, further negotiation of the instrument is no longer allowed because the negotiable character of that instrument has been destroyed. Okay? Tapos paalala ulit, although you are allowed to further negotiate the instrument, in Section 36, paragraphs B and C, the rights of the subsequent endorsees will only be similar to the right of the first restrictive endorsee. So if that first restrictive endorsee is an agent, then subsequent endorsees will all become agents. If the first endorsee is a mere trustee, then the subsequent endorsees under that restrictive endorsement will also be considered as trustees, just like that first restrictive endorsee. Let's now consider this one, qualified endorsement. So what is this qualified endorsement? Simply defined as sabi niya, qualified endorsement, you will now constitute the endorser a mere assigner to the title of the instrument. What's the meaning of that? You are making the endorser a mere assigner to the title of that instrument. It simply means that in qualified endorsement, your endorser is trying to limit the extent of his liability. That he could be held liable only if there will be violations of his warranties under Section 65. Okay? So if there is no violation of the warranties of or the admissions found in Section 65, if ever you will make a qualified endorsement, you will no longer be held liable. Okay, yun ang ibig sabihin yan when it says that in qualified endorsement, the endorser is merely constituted an assigner of the title of that instrument. So how can you make that qualified endorsement? So by way of illustration, on the face of the instrument, it says here, I promise to pay sana order, 1 million, sign Mike. Then at the back of the instrument, ganito ano ngayon ang makikita mo. Pay to Yang without recourse. So when you included the word without recourse, then that is now what we call as qualified endorsement. Or when you stated pay to Yang at endorses risk, again, that is also qualified endorsement. Sir, ibig bang sabihin dito sa pay to Yang without recourse, ibig bang sabihin Yang is already totally freed from liability? The answer is no. Yang is not yet totally freed from liability. She could still be held liable. Sabi ko nga, she will be held liable if there will be violation of the warranties found in 65. If there is no violation of the warranties in 65, that's the time that he will now be freed from liability. Kaya nga ang sinasabi natin, qualified endorsement will only limit the extent of his liability. The liability is not yet totally eradicated because the liability will still become available. It will still be enforced, assuming that there will be violation of the warranties found in 65. I want you, however, to take note of the last paragraph of Section 65. Yung sinabi niya na the you have no personal knowledge of any fact which would impair the validity of the instrument or render it valueless. Okay? So, kasi andun sa Section 65, anong sinabi niya doon? A person who negotiates an instrument by delivery or through qualified endorsement warrants that the instrument is genuine in all respect what it purports to be, that you have good title to it, that all prior parties have the capacity to contract, and the last one is that at the time it was negotiated to him, he has no notice of any infirmity or defect in the title of the person negotiating it. Sabi mo, sir, na kung walang violation doon sa warranties na yon, freed na siya sa liability. Yes, tama yon. So, how about if that instrument bears a forged signature? That instrument contains material alteration na violate yung first warranty. Ibig bang sabihin, liable na siya? That he has good title to it. Okay? Yung prior parties has good title to it. Good title, it means that you have good title if the title was not acquired using fraud. Okay? So halimbawa, nakuha yung instrument because of fraud. Again, the second warranty has been violated. Ibig bang sabihin, liable na siya? Okay? And that all prior parties have the capacity to contract. Eh halimbawa, yung isang party, minor. Yung isang party, prior party is insane. Na-violate na naman yung third warranty. Ibig bang sabihin, liable na siya? Well, dito sa qualified endorsement, the qualified endorser will become liable only if he has personal knowledge of those defects. If he has no personal knowledge that the instrument contains a forged signature, that the instrument contains material alteration, that a prior party has obtained that instrument due to fraud, or he has a defective title, or in a situation whereby a prior party is incapacitated. to give consent to that contract. If he is not aware any of those, if he has no personal knowledge of those defects found in paragraphs A, B, and C of Section 65, he is not yet liable. Kaya nga sinasabi natin, qualified endorsement limits the extent of your liability. Why is that? Because even if there is a defect in that instrument, even if there is a violation of your first three warranties, if you will be able to prove that you have no personal knowledge of those defects, then you can still be freed from liability. You have no liability if it will be shown that you have no personal knowledge about those defects. Yun ang gamit ng qualified endorsement. Okay? Unlike in a situation whereby you will just negotiate the instrument through special endorsement, tapos may violation, halimbawa may what do you call that? May forgery, may material alteration, may prior party na insane or minor, may defect doon sa title, even if you do not have any personal knowledge of those defects in the instrument, you are already liable. Kasi general endorser ang classification mo. And a general endorser is liable if the instrument contains a defect. And it does not matter whether you have personal knowledge or you have actual knowledge of that defect. Dito sa qualified endorsement, if you do not have any personal knowledge of those defects, you are still freed from liability. Anyway, when we reach liabilities of parties, we will have additional discussion on that. Okay, how about this facultative endorsement? Yung dinagdag natin. Facultative endorsement, kabaliktaran niya ng qualified endorsement. If qualified endorsement, you restrict your liability, the extent of your liability. In facultative endorsement, you will enlarge now the scope of that liability, such as when you will now waive your right to receive the notice of dishonor. As of this early, I want you to remember that if the instrument is dishonored, you are a person secondarily liable. You are, for example, an endorser. Before you can be held liable in that instrument which has been dishonored, there are two requirements that must concur. First, the instrument has been dishonored. And the second one is that you should have been duly notified of the fact of dishonor. And how could you be duly notified of that? Through the delivery of what we call now as a notice of dishonor. However, if you will now waive that notice of dishonor, then once the instrument has been dishonored, your liability will now immediately attach. Na present yung instrument for payment, hindi nagbayaran, then liable ka na kaagad. No need to receive the notice of dishonor because you have already waived your right to receive the notice of dishonor. Later on, when we reach when we reach that notice of dishonor, you will learn that in this kind of waiver of notice of dishonor, only Yang, okay? Si Yang lang ang hindi dapat bigyan ng notice of dishonor. The other endorsers or other parties secondarily liable for that matter are still required to be served with a notice of dishonor. Kasi siya lang ang nag-waive ng kanyang right. So for example, Yang negotiated that to Zenny, tapos Zenny to Alpha, and then when Alpha went to Mike to enforce payment, ayaw bayaran ni Mike si Alpha, yung present holder, si Alpha, kailangan pa rin niyang magbigay ng notice of dishonor kay Zenny, pero when it comes to Yang, considering that Yang waived his right to receive the notice of dishonor, then it's no longer necessary for Alpha to still serve notice of dishonor to Yang. So kagaya yung sinasabi natin, when you will make what we call as a facultative endorsement, you are now enlarging the scope of your liability. Bakit enlarging? Because instead of requiring the presence of these twin requirements of dishonor of the instrument and then notice of dishonor, kapag gumawa ka ng facultative endorsement, there is no more notice of dishonor that will be served on you. Once the instrument has been dishonored for non-payment or for non-acceptance, your liability will now immediately and automatically attach. So endorsement, which is payable to bearer, yung sinasabi natin, yung sinasabi natin dito na payable to bearer instrument, we are actually referring to an originally payable to bearer instrument. So I want you to intercalate the word originally. Okay? Doon sa section 40, makikita nyo doon, where an instrument payable to bearer. Di ba yun ang sinabi niya? Okay? So that it will be clearer, pwede mong sabihin intercalate yan, where an instrument is originally payable to bearer, is endorsed especially, it may nevertheless be further negotiated by delivery, but the person endorsing it specially is liable as endorsers, not only to such holders, as endorsers, to such holders as make title through his endorsement. Ito yung explain ko doon sa first part ng discussion natin ng negotiation. That when an instrument is payable to bearer, originally payable to bearer, you are still allowed to negotiate it through endorsement completed by delivery. However, in that particular scenario, instead of being liable to your immediate transferee, you will now be held liable by those individuals who will now derive their title from your special endorsement. Kagaya dun sa illustration natin, in-specially endorse mo kay A, in-specially endorse ni A kay B, B kay C, special endorsement. Tuloy-tuloy lang yung liability mo. Liable ka pa rin sa kanilang lahat. And in that case, sabi natin, your liability will stop only when another person will again negotiate the instrument by delivery. So kung walang nag-negotiate ng instrument by delivery, then you are still liable to all those subsequent endorsees. Take note, originally payable to bearer. It does not apply to a converted order to bearer instrument. Malala nyo yung when the only or last endorsement is in blank, di ba? Yung order magiging bearer, hindi siya applicable sa scenario na ito. Yung Section 40, applicable lang yan doon sa originally payable to bearer instrument. For example, pay to the bearer, pay to X or bearer, mga ganon. So those are the only cases where the Section 40 will be applied. It applies only to an instrument that is originally payable to bearer. Kagaya nitong illustration natin, so tingnan natin sa illustration natin. Mike made a promissory note addressed to Peter or bearer, and then bearer. So what kind of instrument is this? This instrument is what we call as a bearer instrument because it is expressed to be payable to a specific person or bearer. How about if, in this particular case, how can Peter negotiate this instrument to Alpha? Considering that this is a bearer instrument, then Peter could just deliver it to Alpha. Alpha could just deliver it to Bert. Bert could just deliver it to Charlie. In which case, if Peter delivers the instrument to Alpha, then Peter is liable only to Alpha. When Alpha will deliver that instrument to Bert, then Alpha is liable only to Bert. Immediate transferee. When Bert negotiated that instrument to Charlie by delivery, again, Bert is only liable to Charlie. Peter is not liable to Charlie because Charlie is not an immediate party insofar as Peter is concerned. The word immediate there is referring to what we call as proximity or distance and not to privity or relationship of the parties. Okay, so ito yung reason bakit pwedeng i-deliver lang yan because bearer instrument, endorsement is not necessary. It can be negotiated by mere delivery. How about if Alpha negotiated it to Bert by way of special endorsement? May Bert still negotiate the instrument by way of delivery? So, yung tanong ngayon is, how about if Alpha negotiated that instrument to Bert by way of special endorsement? Special endorsement. Si Bert ba, pwede pa rin ba niyang i-deliver yung instrument kay Charlie? Negotiation by delivery? Section 40 provides that where an instrument is originally payable to bearer and the same has been specially endorsed, kagaya ng ginawa ni Alpha kay Bert, special endorsement, that instrument can still be further negotiated by mere delivery. Okay? It may nevertheless, sabi niya doon, be further negotiated by delivery. Okay? So because a bearer instrument is always a bearer instrument, and as such, it can always be negotiated by mere delivery. Question number 2. Assuming that Peter negotiated the instrument to Alpha by way of delivery To whom is Peter liable? Yan, Peter to Alpha by way of delivery. Sabi natin, Peter is only liable to Alpha because in this particular situation, the person who negotiated that instrument by delivery is liable to his immediate transferee. Consider distance and not relations of the parties. Okay? Continuation on question number 3. Who is liable to Bert then? Assuming that Alpha negotiated it to Bert also by way of delivery. Yung illustration natin. So, Alpha negotiated it to Bert by delivery. Sino ngayon ang liable kay Bert? Sabi niya. Ang liable dito would just be Alpha because Alpha is the immediate transferee. Okay, question number 4. How about if Peter, notwithstanding the fact that it's a bearer instrument, he negotiated the instrument to Alpha by way of special endorsement completed by delivery? To whom is Peter liable? Ito na yun, yung sinasabi natin. Peter is now liable to all parties who will now derive their title from his endorsement. So habang merong nagne-negotiate through endorsement completed by delivery, he is liable. And the liability of Peter, if that will be the case, will stop only when somebody will now negotiate the instrument by way of delivery. So as long as no endorser will negotiate the instrument by delivery, the liability of Peter will still continue. Additional discussions on endorsement. Okay, so tingnan rin natin to. Yung sinasabi natin kanina, endorsement should be an endorsement of uh, two or more persons having the same interest. Okay, so endorsement made by two or more persons. So for example, Zenon and Zenny are jointly liable. Sabihin na, gamitin natin yung isa. Gawa na lang tayo. Okay, so for example, on the face of your instrument reads as follows. I promise to pay uh, Yeng and Zenny, or bearer, 1 million pesos. Signed, Mike. Okay? So, if you notice, there are two endorsees here. Sorry. There are two payees here. So, if they will negotiate that instrument now, at the back of the instrument, how will they negotiate it? So, halimbawa, ine-negotiate nila yan kay Alpha. So, how will they negotiate that? Pwede rin ganitong gawin nila. So, pay to Alpha, signed, Yang, and then signed Zenny. Ganyan. So that's the first way by which they could negotiate the instrument. So first first form of negotiation. Pwede rin ganito. So in case Yang has appointed Zenny to be his agent. So under that second illustration, sabihin natin Yang has been constituted as a principal and Zenny has been appointed as the agent. So in that particular case, they will now negotiate it to Alpha. So how can he now negotiate, how can Zenny now negotiate that instrument to Alpha? So pay to Alpha, ganun pa rin. Signed, Zenny. And then, another signature, signed, Zenny for Yen. So dalawang beses yon. Okay? Hindi lang isang beses. Yung Zenny, yung sa signed Zenny, she is signing in her personal capacity. Tapos Zenny for Yang, then Zenny is now negotiating the instrument in her capacity as the principal of Yang. Maalala nyo ba yung section 19, 20 na diniscuss natin noon? That whenever you will negotiate, you have to negotiate in order to negate your liability. Sabi dito. But how can you do that? By, remember the three requirements? You disclose the name of your principal, such as Yang here in this case. You add words indicating that you're signing as an agent, okay? And that you must be duly authorized. So if you have complied with those three requirements, then in that situation, the agent is no longer liable. Pero dahil dalawa sila dito, and they have common interest here as pays, pwedeng sabihin ni Zenny na sign Zenny and then sign Zenny for Yang. Or pwede rin na yung situation that their interest is solidary. Okay, so on the assumption that the interest is solidary, so third illustration is in a situation whereby they are now solidary payees. So pay to alpha, paano ang gagawin? Pwedeng, pwedeng signed, signed yen lang, or signed zenny lang, or another or, pwedeng signed yen, pwede, tapos signed zenny. Okay? So, ganon. So, there are three ways by which you could properly negotiate now this instrument. So, Yang and Zenny, there are two endorsees, there are two payees, and if Yang and Zenny will decide to negotiate that instrument further, pwede nilang gawin na ganito, pay to alpha, signed Yang, signed Zenny, dalawa sila. Or yung second illustration is, Yang will appoint Zenny as his agent, as her agent. So, paano ang gagawin ni Zenny? Sign Zenny, that is in her personal capacity, tapos gagawa siya ulit ng new signature, signed Zenny for Yang. Because in this situation, this is proof that Zenny is now acting as an agent of P, no longer in her own personal capacity. Or in a situation whereby the claim of Yang and Zenny over that promissory note is actually solidary, then it is also possible that the endorsement will be made as follows. Signed Yang alone. Okay? Hindi na niya idadagdag si Zenny. O kaya, signed Zenny alone. Wala na rin si Yang. Or, it is possible that both of them will just affix the respective signatures. Signed Yang, signed Zenny. Pwedeng-pwede yung ganon. Okay? So, let's go back to our slide. Kagaya dito, tingnan natin yung mga ginamit natin illustrations. If Xenon and Zenny are jointly liable, then pay to Yankee, sign Xenon, sign Zenny. If Xenon and Zenny are jointly liable, however, Zenny appointed Xenon to be her representative, then ito na yun, Xenon, and then in her personal capacity, and then yung second one would be sign Xenon for Zenny. Okay, in her now capacity as the agent of Zenny. And then the third illustration, if Xenon and Zenny are solidarily reliable, pwedeng Xenon lang, alone na, or Zenny lang na alone, o kaya yung sinabi natin kanina, Xenon and Zenny both. Okay, kagaya ng ginamit natin sa illustration. And then, Section 42, endorsement made by a cashier. Ito yung sinabi ko sa inyo noon when we were still discussing in payable to order instrument, that when an instrument is payable to a cashier or to a fiscal officer, the presumption is that the instrument is for the office that they are representing. So, that being the case, how will this instrument be further negotiated? So, for example, let us assume that at the back of the instrument, ganito yung nakita doon. Pay to the SLU president and then sign Xenon. So in this particular case, assuming that SLU still wants to negotiate that instrument to Mike, how will they be able to do that? Well, under Section 42, sabi doon, the endorsement shall be made by the fiscal officer or other responsible officers of that corporation. So dito, pay to the SLU president, ang gagawin lang, it will be negotiated by the president of SLU, Reverend Father Gilbert M. Sales. So, pwedeng-pwede yung ganon. Or, it's possible that it will now be signed by the Vice President for Finance. So, pwedeng sabihin, Evangeline Trinidad in her capacity as the SLU Vice President for Finance. Okay? Or, another illustration, at the back of the instrument, pay to the SLU President, signed Xenon, then pay to Mike, yung pagbibigyan ng SLU, but it's no longer Father Sales who will be signing it or endorsing it. Rather, it will now be signed by another officer of that school. So, SLU Vice President for Finance, Evangeline Trinidad. Okay? And I want you to remember that when an instrument is payable to a cashier or to a fiscal officer, the presumption is that it belongs to the office that they are representing. That presumption, however, is not conclusive. That presumption is only prima facie or rebuttable or disputable. So, ibig sabihin nun, if that instrument is really for the SLU president, then the SLU president must be able to present evidence that that instrument was really intended to him in his personal capacity, and it's not intended for the office that he is representing. But in the absence of any countervailing evidence, the presumption is that it is for the office that he is representing. Okay? So, ano yung note 1 natin dito? Where the instruments payable to cashier or holder of an office for time being, said person can negotiate it or any other fiscal officer of the corporation. And then note number 2, it is prima facie, it is rebuttable, it is disputable that the instrument is for the corporation, it is for the office that is being mentioned that, and it's not for the person concern in his or her private capacity. And kaya nga sabi na dito, if he wants to get it, then he should be able to present evidence to justify his claim over that personal property, over that amount. Because the presumption is that amount actually belongs to the office and not to the person in his or her personal capacity. Endorsement in a representative capacity, ito na yung sinasabi ko sa inyo kanina, that whenever you will negotiate in your capacity as an agent, you have to comply with the 3 requirements. Okay? You must be duly authorized. You have to add words indicating that you're signing as an agent, and you have to disclose your principal. It is in that way that you will now endorse the instrument in order to negate or to negative personal liability. Remember the case of Jose Arguego? He did not disclose the name of the principal, in which case he was held personally liable. So I promise to pay Peter or order 1 million, signed Mike as agent of Miles. So let's analyze on the assumption that Mike has been duly authorized as the agent of Miles. Is there a word indicating that he's signing as an agent? Yes, ito yun, as agent of. And did he disclose the name of his principal? Yes, when he added the name of Miles. So as agent of Miles. So as agent of the principal. Another situation is this one. Mike for Miles. So Mike is the agent, and for is the word indicated in order to show that he's signing as an agent, and then Miles the name of the principal. Or it could be Miles by Mike, principal by the agent. So Miles is the principal, name has been included, by is the word indicating that he's not signing in his personal capacity, but is merely signing as an agent. So if the presumption that Mike has been duly authorized, then in that case, it is not Mike who will be held liable. Rather, it is Miles who will now be held liable. Kaya sabi natin dito, you have to revisit your sections 19 and 20 if you have already forgotten the 3 requirements that you have to comply so that it will be the principal who will still be held liable and not the agent. Kasi nga, yung agent, siya mismo yung pumirma. So if the agent will not comply with those 3 requirements, rule, it is now the agent who will be held liable because the signature of the agent is the one which appeared in that instrument. How about if your name has been misspelled? How will you now negotiate that instrument if your name has been misspelled? Under Section 43 states that where the name of the payer endorsee has been misspelled, then he will still negotiate it using that misspelled name or wrongfully designated name, adding, if you think fit, your proper signature. Okay. So take for example in this case, the true name here is not Mikay Floresca. The true name of the endorsee is Mr. Michael Flores. Lalaki siya. Pero ano ang ginawa mo when you endorse that instrument to Mr. Michael Floresca instead of Mr. Michael Flores? Instead of writing correctly his name as well as his designation, instead of writing Mr. Michael Flores, nagkamali ka. Ginawa mo siyang Miss Mikay Floresca. So in that particular case, how can Mr. Michael Flores now negotiate that instrument further? Well, sabi natin sa Section 43, you have to negotiate it using the misspelled name, adding, if you think fit, the proper signature. So, how will Mr. Flores now negotiate that instrument further? Halimbawa, ina-negotiate niya yan kay Zenny, ganito ang gagawin niya. Pay to Zenny, signed, Miss Mikay Floresca. If he will stop there, is there already proper negotiation of the instrument? The answer is yes. Because Section 43 provides that you will negotiate it under the wrongfully designated name or that misspelled name. The inclusion of the correct spelling or your correct title is only optional. So, kung ang ginawa ni Mr. Michael Flores is ginaya niya yung pangalan niya doon as pay, Miss Mikay Floresca. Ganun din ginawa niya. Signed, Miss Mikay Floresca. That will be sufficient. Pero kung gusto niyang sabihin yung totoo niyang pangalan, kung gusto niyang ipakita yung totoo niyang gender through the use of the title Mr., pwede rin niyang idagdag dito, Mr. Michael Flores. However, sabi nga natin, the inclusion of the correct name and the correct title is only optional. Siguro nagtatanong kayo, nag-iisip kayo, Sir, pwede po ba na wag na lang niyang gamitin yung Mikay Floresca? Ang gamitin na lang niya yung totoo niyang pangalan na Michael Flores? The answer is no. Section 43 is specific on the matter. You still have to negotiate it using the misspelled name or the wrongfully designated name. The inclusion of the correct title, the inclusion of the correct name is the one which is optional. Okay? So that will be your section 43. And then, yung 44, 45, 46, 47, natapos na rin yun. Yung 47 natin, yung when the instrument negotiable in origin, continues to be negotiable until restrictively endorsed or discharged by payment or otherwise. Di ba? Yun ang sinabi natin doon. And then section 48, that's what we call now as striking out of endorsement. So anong ibig sabihin ng striking out of endorsement? You remove an endorsement. And when can you remove an endorsement? The holder is authorized to strike out an endorsement if that endorsement is not necessary to his title. Okay? So, you are allowed to strike out, you are allowed to remove an endorsement, provided that the endorsement that you are removing is not important to your title. Which means that even there is no such endorsement, it would still be possible for you to explain how come you are now in possession of that instrument. Okay? So yun ang ibig sabihin nun. If you can still explain the process or how were you able to obtain possession of that instrument, then the endorsement or prior endorsements can now be considered not necessary to your title. If you will be confronted with the problem about striking out of endorsement, how are you going to approach that kind of problem? If you will be confronted with that situation, the first thing that you'll have to do is to identify the nature of your instrument. Anong klaseng instrument ba yan? Is it a bearer instrument or is it a payable to order instrument? Why are you going to do that? Because basics the rule that when an instrument is payable to bearer, it can be negotiated by mere delivery. And if it is a payable to order instrument, it could be correctly negotiated through endorsement completed by delivery. Okay. So, what is our rule then? If the instrument is payable to bearer, what is our rule? What are those endorsements that are not necessary to your title? Well, if it is a payable to bearer instrument, then all endorsements are not necessary to your title. Why all endorsements are not necessary to your title? Because being a bearer instrument, it can be negotiated by mere delivery only. Endorsement is not necessary because it can be negotiated by mere delivery. But how about if after determination of that kind of problem whereby there is striking out of endorsement, you notice that it is an order instrument. Ano ngayon ang gagawin mo? If it is an order instrument, the next thing that you will do now is to look for a blank endorsement. Maghanap ka ng blank endorsement. And all endorsements after that blank endorsement are no longer necessary to your title. Why is that? Because under Section 9, Paragraph E, when the last endorsement is a blank endorsement, then the instrument is a bearer instrument. So if it's a bearer instrument, the subsequent endorsements are likewise not necessary to your title because the instrument, being a bearer instrument now, can be negotiated by mere delivery. Okay, tingnan natin. So this is the simplified rule on striking out of endorsement. The endorsee may at any time strike out an endorsement not necessary to his title. Okay, so things to remember: first, to identify the nature of the instrument. If it is a bearer instrument, then all endorsements are not necessary to your title because, just like what I have earlier mentioned, if it is a bearer instrument, it can be negotiated by mere delivery. But how about if it is an order instrument? All you have to do is to look for a blank endorsement, because the effect of a blank endorsement and an order instrument is that it converts that order instrument into a bearer instrument. So as long as it remains as a bearer instrument, it can be negotiated by mere delivery. So ano yung pwede mong tanggalin dito if it's an order instrument? All endorsements after your blank endorsement. Kapag bearer instrument, ano yung mga pwede mong tanggalin? All endorsements. It does not matter what kind of endorsement is that. Whether it is blank, special, restrictive, qualified, it does not matter. Because all those endorsements are not necessary to your title. Okay? So let's take a look at these illustrations. Payable to bearer. Okay, so Mike to Peter or bearer. And then Peter specially endorsed that to Alpha. Alpha specially endorsed that to Bert. Bert specially endorsed that to Charlie, and Charlie is the present holder. So parang ganito yung instrument nyo. Gawa tayo ng whiteboard. So the promissory note reads as follows. I promise to pay Peter or bearer. Okay, so capital natin yan. 1 million pesos. And then signed Mike. What happened? At the back of the instrument, ganito ang nakita. Pay to Alpha. Okay. Signed Peter. And then Alpha later on negotiated that to Bert. So pay to Bert. Signed Alpha. And then later on, Bert negotiated the same to Charlie. So pay to Charlie. Signed Bert. In this particular scenario, Charlie is now the present holder. So ang tanong ngayon, what are those endorsements that can be struck out by Charlie? What are those endorsements that are not necessary to his title? What are those endorsements that even if he will remove, it would still be possible for Charlie to explain how come he is the possessor of the instrument? So ano yung pwede niyang tanggalin? Is it possible to remove this special endorsement of Bert in his favor? Is it possible to remove the special endorsement of Alpha to Bert? Is it possible to remove the special endorsement of Peter to Alpha? Well, considering that this is a bearer instrument, then all endorsements are not necessary to the title of Charlie. That being the case, then Charlie can remove or strike out the special endorsement of Peter. He can likewise strike out the special endorsement of Alpha, and then he could also strike out the special endorsement of Bert in his favor. Okay. But how about if it is an order instrument? So gamitin din natin similar case. However, it is now an order instrument. So I promise to pay Peter or order 1 million, signed Mike. Ano yung rule natin kanina? Sabi natin, if it is an order instrument, ang gawin mo, maghanap ka ng blank endorsement. Okay? Blank endorsement. Take for example, so Peter negotiated that to Alpha through special endorsement, and then Alpha negotiated that to Bert through special endorsement. Okay. So ngayon, Bert is now the present holder. Ano ang ginawa ni Bert ngayon? Gumawa rin siya ng sarili niyang endorsement. And how did he do that? Sign Bert. Yeah. So sign Bert. And then after affixing his signature here, what did he do? He delivered the instrument to Charlie. Okay? So Charlie now, when he received the instrument, he thereafter made his own endorsement. Pay to Dar. Okay? So signed Charlie. And then Dar later on made another endorsement. Pay to Emily. Okay? So, signed Dar. So, Emily now is the present holder. What are those endorsements that can be removed by Emily? Those endorsements that even if he will remove, it is still possible for her to explain how come she is now the possessor of the instrument. So, ang rule natin kanina, maghanap ka ng blank endorsement. So, ano ang blank endorsement dito? The blank endorsement being referred to here is the blank endorsement of birth. And what is our rule? After finding a blank endorsement, then all the subsequent endorsements after that blank endorsement can now be struck out. So, is it possible for Emily to strike out the endorsement of Charlie to Dar? The answer would be yes. The endorsement of Dar to Emily? The answer would be yes. Why? Because if Emily will remove these two endorsements, special endorsements, what will happen? Then Emily can just claim that Bert delivered it directly to her. So, pwedeng-pwede yung ganon. But how about if Emily, ang ginawa niya, gumawa siya ulit ng special endorsement niya. Okay? So, gumawa rin siya ng special endorsement niya. Signed Emily and then delivered to Fanny. So, si Fanny naman ngayon, ang ginawa niya, pay to Honey. Okay? Signed Fanny. So, in that particular situation, Honey now is the holder. What are those endorsements that can be removed by Honey? If you notice, dalawa yung blank endorsement natin dyan. The blank endorsement of Bert and then the blank endorsement of Dar. In this particular case, if there will be two or more blank endorsements, it is enough that you will retain the first blank endorsement. So, ang tanong, ano yung mga pwedeng tanggalin? The blank endorsement of Charlie to Dar in favor of Dar, the special endorsement of Dar to Emily, and then the blank endorsement of Emily, and then the special endorsement of Fanny in favor of Honey. So, yun ang mga pwedeng tanggalin ni Honey. Ang pwede niyang tanggalin, uulitin ko, is yung special endorsement ni Charlie, yung special endorsement ni Dar, yung blank endorsement ni Emily, tsaka yung special endorsement ni Fanny. Because if there will be several or multiple blank endorsements in a payable to order instrument, it is enough if you will retain the first blank endorsement in that payable to order instrument. And all endorsements that will follow thereafter can now be struck out because all those endorsements are no longer necessary to your title. Okay? So going on further, let's now proceed with the so-called illustrations. Okay? So, tingnan natin what endorsement can be struck out by Charlie, if any, dito. Because this is payable to bearer. Ang sagot, all endorsements. Because they are not necessary to his title, bearer instrument can be negotiated by mere delivery. But if it's payable to order, okay, so Mike to Peter or order, and then special endorsement made by Peter to Alpha, Alpha to Bert through special endorsement again, Bert to Charlie again through special endorsement, and Charlie is the present holder. What endorsements can be struck out by Charlie, if any? Ang pwede niyang tanggalin? Wala. Okay? Because all of them are necessary to his title. But in illustration number 2, Alpha now made a blank endorsement and later on delivered that to Bert. Bert thereafter made a special endorsement in favor of Charlie. So what are those endorsements that can be struck out or removed by Charlie, if any? Yan. He can remove the special o endorsement of Bert only. Kasi the endorsement of Alpha is already blank. So maghanap ka ng blank. Pagkatapos ng blank, all endorsements after that are no longer considered necessary to your title. So you can now strike out those particular endorsements. Okay? And then, Section 50, yung Section 49 na hindi ko sinama dito kasi yun na yung assignment na sinasabi nila. That in assignment, sabi nga natin, the assigner will only transfer his title to the assignee. So if the assigner has a good title, he transfers good title to the assignee. If he has defective title, then he transfers defective title to the assignee. But if you are the assignee, of that assignment, okay, of that transfer. Under Section 49, it says that besides acquiring the title of the assigner in the instrument, you also have the right of demanding from the assigner that he will make the requisite endorsement. And in that situation, if there has been endorsement that is made, you will no longer be known as a mere assignee. Rather, you will now be considered as a holder. So as a holder, will you be regarded a holder in due course or a holder not in due course? So if the assigner makes an endorsement as requested by the assignee will not be automatically considered a holder in due course, nor he will be automatically considered as a holder not in due course. Anong gagawin natin? For purposes of identifying whether the holder assignee is a holder in due course, consider the time the endorsement has been made. So if at the time the endorsement has been made, the assignee is still able to meet the requirements under Section 52 on the requisites of a holder in due course, then he's a holder in due course. But if at the time of the endorsement, he did not meet the requirements under Section 52, even if at the time of the assignment, he meets all the requirements under Section 52, he is not considered a holder in due course. Ulitin ko na, for purposes of determining whether your assignee is a holder in due course or not, consider not the date of the assignment, but the date of the endorsement. So if at the time of the endorsement, you were able to meet the requirements in Section 52, but at the time of the endorsement, at the time the endorsement has been made, you will no longer meet the requirements under Section 52. You cannot be considered a holder in due course. Ito, Section 50. Ano naman yung Section 50? Ito yung Section 50, it contemplates a situation whereby the instrument is negotiated back to a prior party. Bumalik. So for example, parang maker napunta kay payee, payee napunta kay alpha, alpha napunta kay Bert, Bert later on bumalik ulit kay maker, o kaya bumalik ulit kay payee, o kaya bumalik kay alpha, a prior party. So if that is the situation, okay? Ano ang pwedeng mangyari sa instrument? When a prior party, when an instrument is negotiated back to a prior party, such prior party who will again receive that instrument may either reissue the instrument or further negotiate the instrument, subject only to the limitation that he could not enforce payment against those individuals to whom he is likewise personally liable. So take for example the following. Mike made the promissory note. He issued that to Peter or order to Alpha, Alpha to Bert, Bert to Charlie, Charlie to Danny, and then later on, it went back to Alpha. So if you notice, Alpha is the same Alpha here. Pareho lang sila. So if that will be the case, ano ang pwedeng gawin ni Alpha dito? Alpha, pursuant to Section 50, may further negotiate the instrument. Okay? However, Alpha cannot demand payment against those individuals to whom he is personally liable. Sino yung mga yon? Itong mga in-between parties nito, si Bert, si Charlie, tsaka si Danny, he cannot demand payment from them. Why? Because for example, Alpha will go back to Danny and demand payment. Danny nagbayad kay Alpha. Anong gagawin ni Danny? Danny will later on go back to Charlie and demand payment from Charlie, and Charlie will also demand payment from Bert, and Bert will go back later on to Alpha and collect. So the rule is that so that there will be no multiplicity of suits here, then Alpha is forbidden from collecting payments from these parties because he himself is personally liable to them. In other words, these endorsements of Bert, Charlie, and Danny are no longer necessary to your title. So, applying the provision of Section 48 on striking out of endorsement, considering that the endorsements of Bert, Charlie, and Danny are no longer necessary to the title of Alpha, then Alpha can now strike out those endorsements, and it does not matter whether it's a payable to bearer instrument or a payable to order instrument, because these intervening parties, these are the parties to whom he is personally liable, which means that he cannot demand payment from them. Their endorsements are not necessary to his title. Okay, how about if this is the situation? Second illustration. Mike to Peter, Peter to Alpha, Alpha to Bert, Bert to Charlie, Charlie to Danny, and then it went back to Mike. Mike is the maker of the instrument. Anong pwedeng gawin ni Mike? Mike can reissue the instrument. Napansin nyo ba? Nung bumalik kay Alpha, ang sabi ko, he can renegotiate the instrument or negotiate it further. But when it went back to Mike, anong sinabi ko? Hindi ko na sinabi na reissue, na renegotiate. Rather, sinabi ko reissue the instrument. Why is that? Because Mike, being the maker, he was the one who issued it. So, he will just reissue, not to negotiate it. Okay? So, let's consider the following activities. Hindi siya activity 2, activity 1 yan. So, case number 1. Assuming that a note for 1,000 pesos was endorsed, okay? Thus, ganito, pay to B for deposit only, signed A, and that B owes Y 1,000 pesos. So, ito, entire negotiation na to. May B transfer the note to Y for the said debt? Okay, so pwede ba? The answer is what? The answer is no. The endorsement is restrictive and his authority is merely to collect. Bakit paano naging restrictive? Kasi sabi doon, pay to be for deposit only. Further negotiation is no longer allowed. Why? Because it has been clearly stated that it is for deposit only. That being the case, further negotiation is no longer allowed. It means that A here can no longer negotiate that to Y because that instrument has been restrictively endorsed. Question number 2. Okay. Can B use the money for his own personal expenses? So assuming that B transfers the note to X for 1,000 pesos, can B use the money for his own personal expenses? What do you think? Again, the answer is no. He cannot also use the money for his personal expenses as his authority is merely to safekeep the money for deposit until A asks for the return of the same. Okay, so tandaan nyo yan. That's also another illustration whereby the instrument has been restrictively endorsed. Okay? Because restrictively endorsed, paragraph A, prohibiting the further negotiation of your instrument. Okay? Now, case number 2. A negotiable promissory note with A as maker and B as pay is endorsed to Y if he passes the CPA board. So that is conditional endorsement. Question, may A pay to Y even if the latter has not passed the CPA board? Ano yung sinabi natin? Yes. In that case, A is authorized to disregard the condition and pay Y. Such payment now will discharge A from his liability on the instrument. Question number 2. Suppose A pays Y without the latter fulfilling the condition of passing the CPA board. So he did not pass the CPA board. Does Y acquire ownership over the amount that was already passed and paid to him? The answer is no. Why? Because he merely held that as a mere trustee of the same. And when there is no fulfillment of that suspensive condition, then it is his duty to return it. If he will not return, then B can actually demand payment from Y or enforce an action from Y because there has been delivery by mistake. Okay? So, pwede niyang gamitin dito yung tinatawag natin na action in rem verso. Okay? O kaya, solution indemnity. Okay? Quasi-contract known as solution indemnity. Case number 3. Okay, so what's this case number 3 all about? Tingnan natin. The note is payable to Miss Dicky Gordon, but the real name is Mr. Dick Gordon. May it be endorsed by the payee using the name Mr. Dick Gordon? Yung section 43 natin kanina, where your name has been misspelled or wrongfully designated. Ano yung rule? You have to Negotiate it under the misspelled name or wrongfully designated name, adding if you think fit the proper signature. Okay? So, yun lang naman. So, in that case, he could still endorse using the misspelled name, yung name na Miss Dicky Gordon. Okay? And then, kung gusto niya na idagdag yung totoo niyang pangalan, then he could just include the name Mr. Dick Gordon. Okay? What else? Ito, another case na naman. Suppose A draws a bill for 1,000 pesos payable to this order. It is endorsed as follows. Okay, so blank endorsement, sign B, and then it is delivered to C. And then special endorsement again, pay to D, sign C. So parang ganito lang yung, and D is the present holder. So parang ganito lang siya kung tingnan mo sa instrument. So on the face of the instrument, pay to be or order, 1,000 pesos, signed A with X as the drawee. Okay? Then at the back of the instrument, this what happened. Signed B, si B na payee, gumawa ka agad ng blank endorsement. And then B delivered that to C. So while this instrument is in the possession of C, this is a better instrument because the last endorsement is a blank endorsement. Pero ano ang nangyari? C thereafter made a special endorsement in favor of D. Okay, so and D now is the present holder. So tingnan natin kung ano ang question dito. Question is, may D strike out the endorsement of C? Yung endorsement ni C ito, yung special endorsement ni C. Can he remove that? Okay? So can he strike out that? Ano ang sagot natin? The answer here is, can he remove it or he cannot? The answer is, yes, D, the holder, may strike out the endorsement of C because the special endorsement of C is not necessary to his title. How about the second question? Okay? Yung second question natin is, may D strike out the endorsement of B? Yung endorsement ni B, yung blank endorsement. Can he remove that? The answer is no, because if D will strike out the endorsement of B, then the instrument will revert to its original nature as an order instrument. And if it's an order instrument, the correct way on how to negotiate that would be endorsement completed by delivery. So hindi niya pwedeng tanggalin yung blank endorsement sa case na to. Okay? And then another, dami pa pala. Suppose that A makes a note for 1,000 pesos with B as payee, and then endorsement from B to C, C to Jack, Jack to C, C to D, D to E to F, F back to Jack. Question, can Jack renegotiate the note, say to Y? Pwede ba? Okay. The answer is yes. Jack may further negotiate the instrument because the instrument was negotiated back to Jack. Diba? Si Jack is, andito siya dati. Jack, si C napunta kay Jack, tapos Jack binalik niya ulit kay C. And then later on, si C to D, D to E to F, F to Jack. And then Jack again dito. So si Jack dyan, napunta kay Jack doon. Okay? Now, in that particular case, he is allowed to further negotiate the instrument. But what is the effect? He cannot enforce payment of that instrument against C, against D, against E, and against F, or those parties that are between Jack and Jack. Okay? So, to whom he is also personally liable. The reason for that is to avoid, sabi nga natin kanina, multiplicity of suits or circuity. Kaya pabalik-balik lang. Kasi kapag nagpabayad ka doon sa person who is liable to you, later on, in the end, you will still be the one paying the obligation. Okay? So, that will now be the end of our module. But, meron akong gustong idagdag dito. Yung sa Section 47, di ba sabi natin doon sa Section 47, the negotiable character of the instrument will continue until it is restrictively endorsed or it is discharged by payment or otherwise. So, ganun yung mangyayari. Okay? So, nag-mention siya doon ng until it is restrictively endorsed. So, take for example, the face of the instrument reads as follows. I promise to pay to P or order 1 million pesos. Signed, Mike. So, sabi natin, when the instrument is already negotiable from the very beginning, its negotiable character will continue until it is discharged or when it is restrictively endorsed. But you have already learned that under Section 36, there are three kinds of restrictive endorsement. You have your prohibiting the further negotiation of the instrument. The other one is constituting the endorsee the agent of the endorser. The third one would be to vest title in the endorsee in trust for or for the use of some other person. What kind of restrictive endorsement will now prohibit, will now destroy the negotiable character of the instrument? So having learned your section 36, you note that it is only section 36, paragraph A, that prohibits the further negotiation of the instrument. That's the reason why, punta kayo doon sa section 47 ninyo, tapos isulat nyo doon, di ba sabi niya, unless restrictively endorsed. I-note mo doon. Note, sabi mo doon, nota bene, NB. Yan. It refers to section 36, paragraph A only. Okay? Prohibiting the further negotiation of that instrument. If what you have made is restrictive endorsee 36B and C, the further negotiation of the instrument would still be allowed. The negotiable character, therefore, of that instrument is not yet destroyed. So, is not yet destroyed. So, if that being the case, yung sinasabi dyan sa Section 47 na restrictive endorsement is limited to Section, hindi 26, Section 36, Paragraph A, prohibiting the further negotiation of the instrument. Okay? So that's it. That will now be the end of the chapter on negotiation. And watch out for other materials to be uploaded.